I'm going to talk about some tools that can help you with identifying weeds and some tools that can help you with choosing the right management tool. So first off, I want to reiterate why it's important to identify weeds in the first place. For me, the number one reason is you identify the plants that you don't know so that you know if you want to keep that plant in your pasture, on your property, wherever you might find it. There are a variety of different reasons you might want or not want a plant. I've got a few listed here, such as palatability. So this means, is it palatable to your livestock? Will they eat it? Will they avoid it? Next could be if it's a toxic plant. If it would harm your animals, you may want to remove a plant, even like as Davey shared, fiddleneck is a native plant. So if you like natives, you might want to keep that. But if you have grazing animals, you may want to remove it. And then lastly, of course, I've got that native or not category. So again, it really depends on what your goals are for the property that you're managing. And then you'll have to decide, do you want that specific plant to be there or not? So I wanted to share another example of a plant that can be suitable for some things and also undesirable for others. And this is yellow star thistle again. Hopefully you've seen this one around now that Davey has shared a lot. This is a plant that's interestingly pretty good food for pollinators. So honeybees would love to come and pollinate these thistles, and goats will pretty happily munch away even on that spiny flower. But on the other side of things, yellow star thistle is highly invasive. It creates giant monocultures that are very challenging to manage. And so it can really harm native biodiversity, and it's toxic to horses. So depending on the kinds of livestock that you're managing on your property or the other goals that you have for your property, you may have different decisions than maybe your neighbor would have. So the second part of then identifying your plants is so that you know how to manage the plant. Once you've figured out what you've got, then you can look up tools like that book that Davey shared, which I also always rely on. It's a great resource. And that can help you identify how much is it going to cost to manage that plant in the way you want it to be managed. How effective are different tools in managing that plant? And what time of the year or what time in the plant's life cycle do you need to come in to manage it in the way that you need it to be? So to follow that, then, what tools are there that can help to identify weeds? And so I want to share a few different digital tools that I've found very helpful. The number one I'm going to offer here is the Weed Research and Information Center's weed identification tool. This is through UC Davis and the UC Cooperative Extension family. And it's actually been managed in partnership with University of Wisconsin Cooperative Extension. And so this link here, I'd be happy to share these slides with anybody who'd like them for all the links. This website is a fantastic resource that goes through different categories and characteristics of plants to help you identify what a weed is that you have. I will note for anybody who's calling in from overseas, who's not in the US, it is specific to United States and District of Columbia, but you are welcome to use it to kind of explore what weeds you might have. I will also note that it's good for all kinds of weedy plants, but if you have a plant that you don't know what it is and it's not coming up in this tool, it's very possible that that plant's just not considered a weed by our system, and you might need to use a different kind of identification tool. So here's what this tool looks like on the website. You will note that there's a search location. So number one thing to do if you're going to use this tool is make sure that you select the correct state that you're in. Otherwise, it might give you some totally different plants that we don't even have wherever you are. Once you've chosen that, then you'll choose a weed type. And on the right side of the screen, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here. Let me see if I can get that too. Here we go. So on the right side here, it describes the 3 different categories or types of weeds that this tool can help you identify. So broadleafs, things like wildflowers, grass-like would be grasses or rushes and sedges. So they're linear kinds of plants. And then woody plants, trees and shrubs and vines. Now, once you've selected your type of weed, then you'll also get this warning and these hints about how to use the tool in the best way. So I do want to highlight it shares that you want to avoid answering too many questions. It will have a list of about 20 different options that you can answer various questions about your weed. And the more that you answer, the more specific the results will be. But if you've gotten something wrong or you're not sure, it's better to not answer it at all. And then it will just give you more options for what that weed could be. Now, the second hint here is they do use some pretty technical terminology in the tool. So if you don't know exactly what it's asking for, there is a little help function on the side of each question, and it will tell you what it's describing. So that could be different parts of the plant or different life cycles and things like that. So if that tool doesn't work for you, whether maybe you're not in the US or you're not finding the plant because maybe it's not considered a weed to our system, there are some other ways that you can do plant ID other than that website. So I have 3 apps listed here. They're all accessible both on your mobile phone. They all have an app for Android and iPhone. They also all have a computer accessible version of their website. iNaturalist is one of the longest existing options here, and I really do recommend it if you are interested. It essentially uses crowdsourcing. So it uses a global community of people who are interested in natural areas. And you can submit a photo of a plant that you're not sure about, and people from all over the globe could pitch in an idea on what that plant could be. And there's a lot of folks who have kind of a proven track record. Maybe they're a botanist for work, and so they're very reliable. But you also can get that kind of peer review by using this system. The only downside being it might take a few days or a few weeks to get a confirmed identification on your plant. iNaturalist is also neat because you can submit photos of animals, insects, fungus, and there's a community there for all of that. PlantNet is similar in that there's a global community of people who use the app. It is specific just to plants, and it's a little bit newer. And one thing that PlantNet is trying to do is to use those human identifications to make a computer algorithm that can better identify plants just based on an image that is submitted to a computer program. So that's a cool one. If you're interested in helping make a better tool, then you can participate in PlantNet. And the third one here is PlantSnap, which is very focused on showy flowering plants. So PlantSnap is not really an option for things like grasses. And if you have a plant that you're not sure about and it's just a seedling, maybe it has no flowers at all, then PlantSnap unfortunately isn't a great option there. But if you do have a good showy flower, then you can use it, and it's more likely to work out well for you. All right, so that's how to identify the plants. In theory, now you know what you've got. Now, what are you supposed to do? How do you know how to control this plant? So there are a bunch of different treatment options. I've got 4 categories listed here that you'll see if you use the book that Davey shared. Biological options are usually insects that are selective predators, meaning that they seek out a specific kind of plant to eat or to lay their eggs on, and they can be used as a really targeted control option. There aren't very many released biological treatments in California, but there are more kind of in development all the time. Cultural methods generally means things that people do. Maybe it's just kind of an overall management plan. It could mean using burning, fire as a tool. And then domestic animals, such as grazing, is also considered a cultural tool. The third category here is mechanical treatments. This includes the physical removal or manipulation of a plant with a tool. And then lastly is the chemical options. And Davey shared several of those with us today, and that is herbicides. And I do want to point out that a chemical treatment could be organic or conventional, but they're both considered herbicides. So how do you choose from all of these options? One thing that I would really like to share with you all tonight is a tool called WeedCut. This is an it's a website that is free to use to help you decide what tools are going to be the best for your property. It was created by a huge team of researchers and weed managers across California, so it is fairly California specific, but the idea behind it should be applicable to other states and even other countries. WeedCut has very detailed reports and a filtering and selection system for over 30 non-chemical methods. So right now, the website does not include herbicides in its list. It is expected in the next couple of years to also begin to incorporate herbicides so that folks can have every possible tool in front of them to make those decisions. Some of the things that you can learn about on this website or to filter by is the scale at which you're trying to treat a weed, the relative costs of different tools, and the limitations or considerations of a tool. So I'm going to share a couple of examples with you all. First one I wanted to share is one that I didn't know existed until I participated in this website creation, flaming, which is essentially a method of using a low-powered blowtorch. You can see in this photo here, they have a propane tank. Let me minimize this really quick. Here we go. So a propane tank and a long metal tube with a kind of a gentle flame. And the idea of flaming is not to burn the plant. It's simply to cause it to wilt. It's high-powered, high temperatures, cause it to wilt, cause cell damage so that it kills the plant, but you don't want to catch the landscape on fire. So that's why this photo shows you're doing this in a green, growing, and moist situation. Now, what I wanted to share here is that any given tool on this website, if you click on the weed control option, it'll have a little summary like this at the very top. So it talks about what kinds of plants it will work best on. This one works best on forbs or broadleafed plants and seedlings, so anything that's really small, young, and delicate. The selectivity, or how particular it can attack a single plant or your target plant. So this is moderately selective. So you can see that you're aiming by hand, but you're still impacting an area at a time. And so if there's a desired plant right next to a weed, you might be killing more than just the target plant. The cost here is considered moderate. So it's $500 to $1,000 per acre per year. Then we have this category of fire risk. Now, as you might imagine, when you're applying fire to the landscape, there is a pretty high risk of fire. So again, this is one that is limited to high moisture situations. Next, we have the safety category. And this is considered to be a moderate risk because again, you're using fire, there's heat, there's the fuel itself, and the strategy of how to do it properly. So this is something that you need to have a trained person doing. Now we have this cool category called cultural resources, which is to say, is it going to impact human infrastructure or archaeological artifacts or landscape characteristics? The benefit here being that a lot of those characteristics are non-flammable. Something in my area of California, for instance, is to have grinding stones, which are non-flammable, and so a fire would not impact those at all. And then our last category here is the environmental hazard. So any potential non-intended consequences of this tool. They're considered low to moderate for this strategy. So you might cause a little bit of increased erosion due to killing the plants on the soil surface. And if there are ground dwelling animals that might have shallow burrows, such as ground squirrels or voles, you might be heating up their habitat, and that might not be so great for them. So I also wanted to share a couple more example methods. So grazing is one that even if you have a pasture that you already have livestock on, you can still manipulate your animals in different ways to target weeds in certain times of the year or in certain pastures. Now, I also wanted to share grazing because it's one that has sort of variable efficacy, and it's kind of a tough one to do without consulting with somebody. So grazing can work well on a variety of different plants, depending on the species of animal that you're using. So as I mentioned earlier, goats will graze yellow star thistle, but horses cannot graze yellow star thistle. So that's just one example of many different things that might change how effective grazing can be as a tool. Grazing has relatively low selectivity. An animal will eat pretty much anything that's around it that it wants to eat. And so to make it eat something that you want it to eat, you generally have to have higher densities of animals and maybe a shorter period of time. Cost can vary. Fire risk is very low. Animals on the landscape often reduce fire risk. So that's one plus of grazing. Safety risk, pretty low risk to people. Cultural resources, similarly, they're not going to go running down a historical building. And environmental hazards, similar to flaming, you might have slightly increased erosion, and then you might also be impacting sensitive plants that don't like to be grazed. The last one I wanted to share, because again, there are over 30 different methods in this website, is tarping. So this is where you take thick sheets of black plastic or some sort of light resistant plastic and completely cover the ground surface to prevent plants from growing. So as you can imagine, This is not a selective tool at all. It does not discriminate. Whatever plant might have been trying to grow beneath it no longer gets any sunlight whatsoever and cannot germinate, cannot grow. The cost here is fairly high, $1,000 to $5,000 per acre per year. Benefits of tarping are that there's basically no risk of fire. You haven't introduced anything flammable, and theoretically, you're reducing fuel loads. Safety, very low risk. It's just plastic tarping. It's pretty hard to hurt yourself with that. Low risk to cultural resources, and then moderate risk of environmental impacts. They mention here erosion. So again, if you're creating a bare space by not allowing plants to grow, that might be more susceptible to runoff if it's raining. There could be sensitive plants under that tarp that you want to have there, but they're not going to be able to survive. And then, of course, there are ground-dwelling animals that if you've got something burrowing underneath, they may not be able to access the surface in that part of your landscape. So I do want to wrap up, so we've got plenty of time for questions. Couple of key points here. Weed identification is crucial so that you know what you have, whether you want it, and how to manage it. There are a bunch of weed ID tools. I mentioned today the Weed Research and Information Center website and a few different mobile and desktop apps. I also want to put in a plug. You can contact folks like me and my team that are on tonight. We have a really well-connected network across the state of California and in other states who can do pretty rapid weed identification if you send us a couple of pictures. And then lastly, there are a lot of different weed control tools. Highly recommend exploring Weed Cut for those non-chemical options. And as Davey pointed out, that book, Weed Control in Natural Areas in the Western United States, is fantastic to figure out what you can do for herbicides. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen.